So I'm going to focus a little bit here on an introduction to our work and how we have created for ourselves a pledge to carbon neutral exhibitions. So my business, Nomad Exhibitions, is based in the UK in Edinburgh. We've been designing, we're a design consultancy, and we've been designing museum, gallery exhibitions, permanent displays, temporary displays, and touring displays for many years, myself over 30 years. And about 10 years ago, we decided to move into international touring exhibitions as an opportunity to create an interesting stream of work. And as part of that, to take control of the whole process of design and production and delivery, because it really eliminated our client from the process. And I think what that enabled us to do was to take the initiative with all of our supply chain and to do something different. And ultimately, that's led to us being able to create the optimum model of a touring exhibition in terms of minimizing climate footprint. Just wanted to set a bit of context here from today. This is from the SME Climate Hub in the UK. And it just highlights, I think, that there's a lot of engagement from businesses, SMEs globally, I think, in accepting that climate reduction policies have to be put into place and that methodologies have to be developed. But you know, there's a kind of resistance to implementing those strategies often, and partly that's to do with a feeling that a company doesn't have the resources to do it, and partly that's about funding. And I think over the last few years, we've realized that it's just essential to take the initiative oneself in one's own business, rather than looking for outside support if progress is going to be made. So we have done that. We have taken the initiative. Funding is always an issue, of course. But I think we take the view that if we don't embrace a sustainable future for our particular industry, then there will not be an industry. So although it's challenging to fund this work just now, it'll be more challenging for us in the future if we don't embrace this challenge now. So where Nomad Exhibitions is today is that we are publicly making a pledge that we can deliver all our contracted services to our customers and our clients climate neutrally, carbon neutrally. And we are the only international touring exhibitions company in the world to do so at the moment. And I hope that that situation changes very soon. We have been in this particular mode of work, this touring exhibitions, we've been on this 10-year journey, as I mentioned earlier there. At the beginning of that process in the early 2010s, we were designing temporary exhibitions for clients that were building several projects a year. And we were finding that there was a lot of material waste through that process. So one exhibition would be built, often using a lot of MDF, for example, and then that exhibition would be landfilled, and then another one would be built. And we encouraged our clients, several of them, to think about investing in a system so that they could use a system repeatedly to make the core of those exhibition projects work. And that system could be then embellished with other displays. And that worked very successfully with clients here in Scotland, including the National Libraries of Scotland, who invested in a system. And then we took that idea of using a modular system as the core of an exhibition into our own international touring exhibition work. And the first time we employed that was in Nanjing in an exhibition we did in 2013. And then we've refined over the last sort of 7 years or so, we've just continually refined how we use that modular system, how we can customize it, including how we can integrate museum quality showcases, which is the sort of holy grail of modular systems for museum exhibitions, because museum showcases have incredibly high specification demands. And in 2019, just before the pandemic, we installed an exhibition in the Canadian War Museum. You see there on the right, which is the latest iteration of this modular system usage, which I'll describe in a bit more detail. So how is it that we can actually make this pledge that we are climate neutral? It's a bold statement, and how do we back that up? Well, I think this is all about a process for us, a 5-step process, and with offsetting being the last possible hurdle that we cross, with this, and the least amount of offsetting that we can possibly create in this whole process. So this all really begins with design, high quality design and considered design, and understanding of engineering processes and materiality. And so, you know, we were fortunate. We were a design company, so we were able to think what would be the optimum design approach for an international touring project or any temporary exhibition process, when we consider all the things we need to bring into that: display casing, graphics, changeable graphics for different languages, etc. So that's our starting point, is design discussion. And then we really look at how we can reduce the material that we're using. And really that's also about creating a very limited materials palette, so that we can be very specific about the materials we use and understand those materials and their life cycle. So if we use lots of different materials and we change those materials each project, we're going to have to keep relearning how we can account for those materials and where those materials sit in a whole supply chain. So we understand our materials very well, and we have only a few of them employed in our projects. And then we measure, when we create a project and when we tour a project, we're measuring our impact at all times. And that process, I'll come on to a little bit, was very complex for us. It is complex for everybody. Everybody needs to, in some way, create a tailored version of a spreadsheet on which they can measure all their output, and we were no different. And then the key thing for us is that is the life cycle of the displays that we build. So we have exhibitions which have a certain life cycle, and we have exhibition displays, our set works, which have a different life cycle. So we reuse components. So when we build one exhibition, we use the same modular sizes, we use the same lighting technology, same materials. And then when that exhibition's retired, we can then reuse those same materials in new displays. So we extend the life of our materials long beyond individual exhibitions. So that's really important for us, is reuse. And at the end of all that, there is some recycling. That may be a long time into the future. When it comes to the end of life, we have very high quality, very durable materials we use. And then we will always have some emissions that are generated through construction, and of course through traveling, through transportation, and that's the part that we then offset, and we offset in different ways, as I'll come on to describing. Offsetting is, of course, highly controversial, and it's the one part of this that we really scratched our heads over, and we wanted to make sure we were doing this in the most responsible way we possibly could. You've heard mention there in the previous presentation about Julie's bicycle, and I'm sure it's been mentioned previously in Green Loop. Julie's bicycle is a fantastic resource, and they highlighted this really interesting summary of what people should think about offsetting being, and what offsetting should not be. And this is certainly something we completely subscribe to as a philosophy. However, I suppose the real question is any carbon cost viable where it can be avoided? And I think that's, for us, is the elephant in the room, always when we're talking about international touring exhibitions, because there is this unavoidable touring cost of transportation, even if we minimize that where we can. I think this is a whole other presentation about the value of touring exhibitions and the value of culture. But briefly, I would say that there are two aspects to this that I think are important. One is, as I say, the value to people of sharing culture, and of being able to witness other cultures in their own space without necessarily having to travel. We can see that as a clear benefit. But also, touring exhibitions replace temporary exhibitions often, and temporary exhibitions have often a large waste cycle, and touring exhibitions essentially take that exhibition and give it a life far beyond a temporary exhibition. So I think those things are worth keeping in mind. So how do we measure our carbon footprint? We started to do this 2 years ago and look very specifically about how we could be very thorough about, well, firstly, to understand what our carbon footprint was, what that meant, what it could be. And then gradually we uncovered more and more levels of detail. We went all the way down all of those different rabbit holes, and we came out the other end with a system that we could employ. And we were helped through that by Climate Neutral Now, which you'll hear about this afternoon as well from Miguel from the United Nations, and through other organisations like Julie's Bicycle and the Gallery Climate Coalition, which is also a fantastic resource. So in the background to all of this, we have a complex spreadsheet, which I'm going to try to just summarise some of the key points on. So we're going to look in particular at one exhibition that we created at the beginning of 2020 with Manchester Museum, with whom you were just hearing a presentation from Alison. We built this exhibition in 2020, and it's been touring up to the present time. So at the commencement in 2020, we had a large carbon footprint that was related to its build. 74% of our total carbon footprint, and then to a lesser extent our Scope 3 emissions related to exhibition transport. And during this 1 year in 2020, we moved the exhibition from the lenders in Manchester, the collection to the United States, and it toured in the United States in 2 venues. So we're accounting for everything along this spectrum, from the build work, the construction, to transportation, to our own staff travel, our office emissions, and our software and comms, and our graphic production. And we're just going to, I'll look at a little bit more detail at some of these aspects in a moment. And then we look at the second year in this, 2021, last year, where the exhibition has been built, but it's traveling. So as in 2020, it was in the United States for 2 venues, and then we moved it to China last year, where it's touring to 3 venues. So this is a period where we see there's a big reduction in the amount of carbon we're generating, 55 approximate tons compared to the previous over 100 tons when we were in build. And at this stage, we're really incurring mostly carbon costs through our transportation process. But if we break this data down a little bit, it might be useful for you to see. We can see that the set work production, as I say, was a considerable amount of the original investment of carbon in our project. It's worth remembering that almost all construction work, all build work, carries some kind of carbon footprint. So if we were building this exhibition as a temporary exhibition or a permanent display, it carries that same production carbon footprint. We are minimizing that impact over the long term by reusing this exhibition, and then ultimately by reusing those displays from which the exhibition is built. And so in that way, we're really that relatively high carbon footprint for construction really for us is spread over many years down the line. It's worth also reiterating that we use a very restricted group of materials, and the bulk of that material is aluminium. In fact, about 75% of the volume of our entire exhibition in material terms is aluminium. Aluminium is has a very high carbon footprint to make, but it is an extraordinarily recyclable material once it's produced. In fact, it's 95% more efficient to recycle than it is to make as virgin aluminium. And so as long as we keep it in use, it actually is very sustainable. We have a 0 landfill policy on all of our work. So at no stage in any of our output do we use landfill. And key to that was an idea some time ago that we would never use MDF. I think even in the UK alone, 350,000 tons of MDF goes into landfill every year. So we just eliminate that altogether from our process. In terms of graphic production, we use fabric to form all of the interpretive graphics within the exhibition, and that material is recycled and it's recyclable. And so, ultimately, there's no landfill plastics that's involved in the process. And all of this, the aluminium, the use of fabric, also allows us to reduce the volume and the weight of our set works as they travel, which in turn reduces their impact in terms of transportation carbon footprint and cost for our customers. Just looking briefly at the transportation, of course, we would prioritize sea and road transport where we can. Occasionally, where necessary, we will use air in the most efficient way that we can. But as I say, we're reducing the impact we have on within the air sector by reducing the volume that we're moving around and reducing the weight. Just moving on quickly, a lesser part of our carbon footprint overall, but very interesting one, is how we measure our own office footprint. And for us, it was fascinating for us to learn that our email, our website, our Slack usage, our Zoom, our WeChat, our WhatsApp, all of these applications carried a carbon footprint that all added up, so that, these relatively low percentages, but, quite sizable when they're accounted for. And, we wanted to have an A to Z accountability. And so, this took quite a bit of research for us to gather together. There's a range of links across the bottom of places where we went to for this data. And of course, we're just going to be refining our ability to measure this more accurately all the time, because we're learning all the time as we go through this process. Offsetting, as I said before, is the ultimate stage of this for us. And we approach offsetting in two distinct ways. On the one hand, we spent many years worrying about the viability of offsetting and where we might be able to invest money to offset our work, and whether that could be reliable. And it was only when we discovered Climate Neutral Now from the United Nations Framework on Climate Change that we found an organization with whom we felt we could have complete trust. And we signed up to Climate Neutral Now at the beginning of 2021, and that's been an extraordinarily fantastic process for us. And I would encourage everybody to check out Climate Neutral Now and listen to the presentation this afternoon by Miguel. In the first year of our membership, we achieved gold, and a gold level of achievement for our measuring, which we're very proud of. Through Climate Neutral Now, we offset, as you might say, in the more traditional way, in that we invest in work such as low fossil fuel cooking stoves, or solar power projects in Asia, globally described projects, globally vetted projects by United Nations, with which we can invest. And we all of our carbon footprint is invested in the Climate Neutral Now program, 100%. But in addition to that, we also subscribe to Strategic Climate Fund. So that's a description that was laid out by Gallery Climate Coalition, and as a way of describing other ways of investing in reducing and offsetting greenhouse gas emissions that were more proactive. And for us, we discovered this organization, SolarAid, through the Gallery Climate Coalition. And SolarAid we have become a corporate partner of theirs. So over and above the offsetting we do through Climate Neutral Now, we donate to SolarAid, and now, as of earlier this year, we're a strategic partner of theirs, and we're providing services to them to help them promote their own work as services that we provide them for free. So I mentioned Climate Neutral Now. I'll not spend long on this slide because you'll hear more about this afternoon. SolarAid, as I say, is this extraordinary British charity that work with communities in Zambia and Malawi to provide solar lights. And their website is there. I would encourage anybody to look at the work they do. We see a real affinity with their work, because for us, lighting is essential to our work. And the educational work, the educational process of providing light for children to continue their studies into the evening is absolutely essential through their work. So we're really proud to be a corporate partner of SolarAid's. We also think it's very useful for us to understand how we should value carbon, and this is very important for us when we're using, for example, strategic climate funds, or we're making a donation to a charity where we're valuing our carbon. And the value in the Climate Neutral Now process per ton can sometimes be quite low. And so we felt that it was important for us that we put a realistic value on carbon per ton. And there's a useful paper written by Arts Council England and Julie's Bicycle, which is illustrated here, on which they carried out some research on the price of carbon. And I think there is an average rate, a reasonable rate, I think, that could be applied to that of £100 sterling per ton, and that's how we value our carbon output. I would say as well that we take the supply chain accountability very importantly. So if we use a product from a supplier that we're unsure about, the supplier has allowed for the carbon footprint in its creation, then we will allow for that carbon footprint ourselves. So we hope that we covered all of the bases. Striking graphic here about what 1 ton of CO2 actually looks like, that I was pleased to pin down and include in this presentation. And then finally, I think it's worth just highlighting that although we're in the business of providing exhibitions, museum exhibitions, cultural exhibitions, our work can really move beyond that into not just in the way that I might be able to have the opportunity to talk to people through platforms such as this, but also through our exhibitions, we can communicate this message of sustainability, whatever the subject of the exhibition might be. And that may be as simple as putting a carbon footprint on our exhibition itself, so that people understand when they visit the exhibition what has gone into its creation, in the same way that people might understand the carbon footprint of a yogurt pot they might purchase in a supermarket. So we think it's very important that consumers understand the carbon footprint of experiences they're having. And I'm sure that will become a much more important thing in the future for people. But also, we want to work with our partners, the people that rent our exhibitions, as well as the partners with whom we collaborate on our exhibitions, such as Manchester Museum, to help them understand the way in which exhibition production and museum interpretation can be more sustainable and more ethical. And you know, that's a debate we're continually wanting to have with all of our network as we move forward into the future, because as I said before, we're constantly learning. We will learn from other people. We will learn from forums like this and from all of your experience, and continue to be better at this, which is vital. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope it's been useful and there's some takeaways in that for people.